Welcome to True Crime Cases Today. We are unveiling a shocking story of jealousy and violence. Colorado, a small town in northern Colorado, with a population of just over 5.5 million people, was known for its traditional values and close-knit. The atmosphere of a typical American suburb from the late 80s. It had 3 elementary schools, 1 high school, public library, and numerous churches of various denominations. The Charles family lived in a 2-story house on Oak Street, one of the most respectable streets in town. Their Victorian-style home, built in the early 21st century, stood out with its well-maintained garden and white fence. Eliza Charles had worked at town library for the past 16 years, advancing from an entry-level position to become the head of the children's department. Colleagues described Eliza as a responsible and punctual employee. She organized weekly reading sessions for children, participated in town educational programs, and ran the summer reading club in the East Austin's church community, where the Charles family had been parishioners for more than 21 years. Eliza was known as an active participant in charitable initiatives. Jordan M. Gann, a retired military serviceman with 26 years of service, worked as a security consultant for a private company. His job required frequent business trips across the country, which eventually began to affect their family relationships. The Charles' 3 children, Smith, 20 years old, Alina, 19 years old, and Miller, 16 years old, were well known in town for their academic and athletic. The Charles family achievements. By the fall of 1998, people began noticing the first strange behaviors in the family. Eliza started appearing less frequently at community events and often looked troubled. Neighbors noted Jordan's frequent late-night departures and returns, which were unusual for his typical work schedule at the library. Colleagues noticed that Eliza began making mistakes in documentation, which was previously uncharacteristic of her. Week before the tragic events, Eliza consulted with family attorney Robert Higgins regarding property division matters. She also withdrew a significant amount from her personal account and took out a new life insurance policy, naming her children as the sole beneficiaries. These actions would later become important evidence in the investigation of her murder. The story of the affair, Jordan M. Gann and Aurelia Newman's affair, began in March 1997 during a security conference in Miami. Aurelia, owner of the successful consulting firm Newman Securities, was presenting a report on new technologies in corporate security. After her presentation, Jordan approached her to discuss potential collaboration, and this business meeting evolved into a personal relationship. Aurelia Newman, a 38-year-old businesswoman, had built her company from scratch over 11 years. Princeton graduate, she possessed a sharp mind and business acumen. Her firm, specializing in security systems, had offices in 3 states and an annual turnover of more than $30 million. While outwardly successful and independent, Aurelia concealed deep psychological issues related to control and manipulation. Over the next 6 months, Jordan regularly flew to Florida under the pretext of business meetings. Aurelia arranged their meetings to appear as professional consultations. She rented offices in different cities, created fictitious contracts, maintaining the appearance of legitimate business activity. In reality, the couple spent time in luxury hotels and private villas. By the end of 1997, Aurelia began showing signs of obsessive attachment. She called Jordan several times a day and sent gifts to his children despite his requests not to do so. In January 1998, she announced her pregnancy, though it later turned out to be a lie. In March, she staged a cancer diagnosis using forged medical documents. Jordan, realizing the seriousness of the situation, attempted to end the relationship in April 1999. In response, Aurelia began blackmailing him, threatening to reveal their affair to Eliza and his employers. She hired a private investigator to monitor the Charles family, collecting information about their daily lives. During this period, she began keeping a diary where she detailed her fantasies about a life with Jordan. After removing obstacles in June 1998, Jordan finally, the plan, returned to his family, cutting off all contact with Aurelia. He confessed his infidelity to Eliza, and the couple began seeing a family therapist. However, Aurelia did not accept this decision. She continued to stalk Jordan, sending anonymous letters to his wife and employers. Her diary began to contain the first entries about plans for Eliza's physical elimination after the final break in her relationship with Jordan. Aurelia Newman's mental state rapidly deteriorated. She began seeing a psychotherapist under a false name, complaining of depression and obsessive thoughts. Records from these sessions, later seized by investigators, showed that Aurelia was in a state of deep emotional crisis, but concealed the true reasons for her condition. In July 1999, Aurelia began developing a plan to murder Eliza. She used her company's resources to gather information about Mrs. Mangan's daily scheduled travel routes and places she regularly visited. For this purpose, she hired 2 private investigators, telling them she was investigating a case of corporate fraud. Eden Malin, a former security officer at Newman Securities, became a key figure in implementing the plan. Eden had been dismissed from the company for exceeding her authority, but maintained loyalty to Aurelia, who had helped cover up the scandal surrounding her dismissal. Using Eden's financial difficulties and criminal connections, Aurelia offered her $60,000 to organize Eliza's murder. Eden Milan brought in 2 perpetrators, Marcus Reed and John Dawson, small-time criminals from Chicago. They were each promised payment of $125,000. Aurelia insisted that the murder should look like a robbery gone wrong. She provided detailed information about the Charles House security system and local police schedules. Throughout August and September 1998, the criminals conducted several rehearsals of the plan murder. They visited Neil 3 times to observe the Charles House. Aurelia rented an apartment for them in a neighboring town. Under the guise of a company office, she also purchased a used car registered under a fake name, which was planned to be used on the day of the murder. Aurelia attempted to disguise the financial trail of the crime preparation to a complex scheme of transfers between various business accounts. She created a fictitious consulting firm in Delaware, through which payments to the perpetrators were processed. Investigators would later discover that, a month before the murder, she had withdrawn more than $150,000 in cash, using various ATMs in Florida and Georgia. By late September 1999, the plan was fully ready for the crime execution. Aurelia chose October 5th, knowing that Jordan would be on a business trip to California that day, providing him with a perfect alibi. She also made sure the Charles children would be at school or in activities during the planned attack. October 4th, 1998, began as a typical Monday in Neil. Eliza Charles arrived at the library at 9:30 in the morning, as recorded by surveillance cameras. During the day, she conducted 2 children's reading sessions and participated in a meeting planning a fall book fair. At 4:45 in the afternoon, she left the library, noting her departure time in the registration log. According to neighbor testimonies, white Ford Taurus, later identified as the criminal's vehicle, was spotted parked on a neighboring street from 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Marcus Reed and John Dawson were in the car waiting for Eliza's return. Eden Milan coordinated their actions by phone from a motel located 10 from the crime SC. At 5:10 evening, Eliza parked her car in the garage. Recordings from a neighbor security Cameras showed that 3 minutes after her arrival, 2 men approached the Charles house. They were dressed in utility worker uniforms and carried tools, which didn't raise suspicions among casual witnesses. The medical examiner determined the time of death between 5:15 and 5:30 in the evening. Perpetrators entered the house through the back door using lockpicks. Eliza was caught by surprise in the kitchen while preparing dinner. According to the coroner's report, she received multiple blunt force trauma wounds to the head. The murder weapon was an adjustable wrench which the criminals took with them at the crime scene. Forensics experts found signs of a struggle: overturned chair, broken dishes, and blood traces on the walls and floor. The examination showed that Eliza had tried to defend herself. Skin particles from her attacker were found under her fingernails, which later became important evidence in the case. At 54:05 and evening, the Mung's youngest son, Miller, returned home from football practice and discovered his mother's body. He immediately called 911. The recording of this call, lasting 4 minutes and 23 seconds, was later used in court as evidence that the teenager was not involved in the crime. The first patrol car arrived at the scene at 5:52 in the evening. Officers secured the crime scene and began interviewing neighbors at 6:15. In the evening, the investigate team arrived, led by Detective Smith Brown. By this time, the house had been cordoned off and crime scene investigators and the medical examiner had arrived. During the initial crime scene examination, investigators determined that nothing valuable had been stolen from the house, contradicting the robbery theory. All of Eliza's jewelry remained untouched, as did the cash in her purse. This fact led detectives to suspect from the beginning that the staged robbery was an attempt to conceal the true motive for the murder. The investigation into Eliza Mangan's murder was led by veteran detective Smith Brown, who had 23 years of experience in the violent crimes division. Initially, investigators pursued 3 main theories: a robbery gone wrong, a murder motivated by personal animosity, and a contract killing. A turning point in the investigation came with the discovery of DNA under the victim's fingernails. Analysis conducted at the Illinois State Crime Laboratory revealed genetic material belonging to Marcus Reed, who had a previous conviction for armed robbery. His DNA profile was already in law enforcement databases. Parallel to analyzing physical evidence, investigators examined the Charles family's phone records. They discovered a series of calls from unknown numbers to the victim's home phone during the month before the murder. All calls were made from disposable phones purchased in the investigation. Florida detectives also uncovered an unusual pattern in Jordan Charles' business trips over the previous 2 years. When questioning Jordan, investigators encountered his reluctance to discuss his business contacts in Florida. However, after being presented with evidence of his extramarital affair with Aurelia Newman, he began cooperating with the investigation. His testimony helped establish the connection between Aurelia and the company through which payments to the murderers were processed. A crucial phase of the investigation involved examining Aurelia Newman's financial transactions. Investigators uncovered a series of suspicious cash withdrawals and transfers through shell companies. Particular attention was drawn to a fictitious consulting firm in Delaware to which $100,000 had passed shortly before the murder. Court authorized wiretapping of Aurelia's phone. Conversations revealed her contacts with Eden Milan. In one conversation recorded a week after the murder, they discussed the need to dispose of the tools. This phrase, according to investigators, referred to the murder weapon, which was never found. Detectives also established the connection between Eden Milan and the murder perpetrators through analysis of surveillance camera footage from the motel where she stayed on the day of the crime. Cameras recorded her meeting with Reed and Dawson the day before the murder. Evidence of all three suspects' presence was found in the motel room, including fingerprints and clothing fibers. By the end of the first month of investigation, investigators had gathered sufficient evidence to charge all participants in the crime. A crucial role was played by testimony from a gas station attendant who identified Reed and Dawson from photographs. He confirmed seeing them on the day of the murder, fueling a white Ford Taurus, which was later found burned in Chicago's industrial zone. The arrests of suspects began on November 15, 1999, as part of a carefully planned operation. Marcus Reed and John Dawson were the first to be apprehended in their apartment in Chicago's South Side. During the search, police discovered part of the murder payment money and a notebook containing Eden Milan's contact information. Dawson, under pressure from evidence and facing life imprisonment, agreed to cooperate with investigators. Within 48 hours of his arrest, his testimony became key to understanding the entire chain of events. He detailed each participant's role in the crime and revealed specifics about the murder preparation, including several preliminary trips to Neil to observe the Charles' house. Eden Milan was arrested on November 17th at Miami Airport. While attempting to leave the country, she was found with a fake passport and tickets to Brazil. During her first interrogation, she denied involvement in the murder, but after being presented with phone recording evidence and Dawson's testimony, she began giving confessional statements. Milan's confession proved valuable as she had kept detailed records of all contacts with Aurelia Newman. She had preserved text messages, emails, and even audio recordings of meetings where crime details were discussed. She had secretly collected these materials as insurance for herself, understanding she might become a scapegoat if the plan failed. Aurelia Newman was arrested on November 20th in her Florida office. By this time, investigators had irrefutable evidence of her involvement in or organizing murder. A search of her home uncovered a personal diary containing records of murder planning, fake pregnancy, and cancer documents and photographs of the Charles family taken by hired detectives. Jordan Mangan's reaction to Aurelia's arrest was captured by local television cameras. He was at the police station, giving additional testimony. When he learned the news, the footage shows him sinking into a chair and covering his face with his hands, realizing the scale of the tragedy his actions had led to. During subsequent interrogations, it was revealed that Aurelia had meticulously documented the development of her plan. Investigators found a folder on her computer labeled Projects Freedom, containing detailed instructions for the perpetrator's money movement schemes and even alternative murder scenarios. She had also maintained a list of potential suspects. She planned a framing case of an investigation. Particularly shocking for investigators was the discovery of a collection of Dad Jordan's personal items in Alexis' home, including his military medals, family photographs, and even clothing items she had stolen during their meetings in her bedroom. She had created a sort of shrine with Jordan's photographs, demonstrating the depth of her obsession. The trial of those involved in Eliza Charles' murder began on March 15, 2000 in the Illinois Circuit Court. The prosecution decided to try the defendants separately, beginning with the direct perpetration aiders of the crime. Marcus Reed, who had refused to plea deal, was the first to stand trial. Reed's trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of his guilt, including DNA analysis, witness testimony, and surveillance camera footage. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before reaching a guilty verdict. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. John Dawson, who had agreed to cooperate with investigators, received a more lenient sentence, 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. His testimony played a crucial role in convicting the other participants in the crime. In his final statement, he apologized to the Charles family, although Jordan and the children declined to attend his hearing. The trial of Eden Milan drew significant media attention. As a former security officer and the primary organizer of the murder, she possessed the most comprehensive information about the crime's planning. Her testimony about the methodical preparation of the murder and Aurelia Newman's role shocked the jury. Milan received 40 years in prison. Culmination of the legal proceedings was Aurelia Newman's trial, which began in June 2000. The prosecution presented more than 300 pieces of evidence and called 45 witnesses. The pages from her personal diary, where she detailed her fantasies about Eliza's death and future life with Dav Jordan, made a particular impression on the jury. Aurelia's defense was built on claims of mental instability caused by obsessive ideas and emotional dependency. However, psychiatric evaluation determined that she was fully aware of her actions while planning the crime. After a 3-week trial, the jury found her guilty on all counts. Judge Robert Henderson, in delivering Alex's sentence, noted the exceptional cruelty and cold-bloodedness with which the murder was planned. He sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole and ordered her to pay $5 million in compensation to the Charles family. The entire Charles family was present during aftermath. The sentencing. Jordan, speaking on behalf of the family, stated, "No punishment will bring Eliza back to us, but today's sentence gives us the opportunity to begin the healing process. We are grateful to the justice system for ensuring all those responsible receive their deserved punishment." The Eliza Charles murder case left a profound impact on all its participants and the history of Neil. After the conclusion of the trials, the Charles family sold their house and moved to another state, seeking to start a new life away from the scene of the tragedy. Jordan left his work in security and dedicated himself to public service, giving lectures about domestic violence and the consequences of marital infidelity. The Charles children coped with their mother's loss in different ways. The eldest son, Smith, graduated from law school and became a prosecutor, specializing in violent crimes. Alina created the Eliza Charles Charitable Foundation, helping children from disadvantaged families access education. The youngest son, Miller, who directly witnessed the aftermath of the tragedy, underwent extensive psychological rehabilitation and became a child psychologist. The Neal Public Library, where Eliza worked, established an annual literary prize in her name for young authors. The children's reading room was renamed in her honor, and the memorial plaque was installed with her photograph and a description of her contributions to developing children's reading in the town. The convicted participants in the crime faced various fates in the prison system. Marcus Reed was killed by another inmate in 2005. John Dawson continues serving his sentence, participating in rehabilitation programs and speaking to youth about the consequences of criminal behavior. Eden Milan wrote a book about her involvement in the crime, but the court banned its publication. Aurelia Newman is serving her life sentence in a maximum security women's prison in Florida, according to prison administration reports. She continues to claim she acted out of love for Jordan. All her appeals have been rejected by the court. Her company, Newman Securities, was sold to competitors, with the proceeds going toward compensation for the Charles family. The Eliza Charles case led to changes in Illinois state legislation regarding stalking and domestic violence. Eliza's law was passed, increasing penalties for stalking and mandating psychiatric evaluation for defendants in similar crimes. Illinois Police Academy uses materials from this case as a teaching example in detective training. Special attention is paid to methods of identifying contract, killings disguised as other crimes,